Hello, BookTube, it's Amy, and I'm back with another segment of my 2024 bookshelf tour. We wrapped up some of the literary classics in the last segment, and we're going to go a shelf lower to where the Hemingway and the Orwell are. So we'll start on the end here, and I'm not going to pull these ones out because they're kind of crammed in this corner here. But you'll see Our Daily Bread, which is a novel by Frederick Philip Grove, and I guess I am going to pull it out because here I go. And this is obviously library binding, but it is a rebound paperback with a nice, macabre, interesting book plate in there. But this is a novel by Canadian author Frederick Philip Grove. And it really is just the same exact thing as you're going to see these colorful volumes. It's a new Canadian library edition, just rebound. And I haven't actually read Our Daily Bread yet. But I did have a period of time in 2022 where I was getting into some of the Frederick Philip Grove. And so I bought, or rather rebought, because I used to own an entire shelf of these vintage New Canadian Library editions. I rebought some of Frederick Philip Grove's novels and then got distracted by other things. But there's that one. And I also have Settlers of the Marsh, The Master of the Mill, Fruits of the Earth, and Consider Her Ways. All novels by Frederick Philip Grove, an early 20th century Canadian writer known for, I guess, what I would call kind of farm literature. A lot of his novels seem to take place in rural areas, on farms, on, agriculture and lumber industry kind of sites. And with Grove here, I have a couple of novels by Morley Callaghan. I have his Strange Fugitive and More Joy to the Earth. Two that I have also not read. And next to that I have another Macmillan Laurentian Library edition. There's the Laurentian Libraries and the New Canadian Libraries. Two sort of mid-20th century series of paperbacks of Canadian literature that were published. And this one here is I think it's a World War II novel once again. These ones are kind of shelved in the corner here, and I've not read them. I did read Fruits of the Earth and The Master of the Mill many, many years ago, but it's been so long now that I couldn't really tell you much, if anything, about the plot of those novels. So next to that we have Never Any End to Paris by Enrique Villa-Matas. And this is a novel about a man, a writer, who is obsessed with Hemingway to the point where he is entering, a Hemingway look-alike contest and spending time in Paris to sort of capture the feeling that he almost is Hemingway. But he's not too impressed when people in his life tell him he's not really anything like Hemingway at all. I've read it a couple times. I enjoyed it. It probably wouldn't still be on my shelf if it weren't for where I got it from. So this is one that I had ordered online from Shakespeare and Company in Paris, and so it has their stamps on the inside there. And so that's sort of why I keep it. And because it is Hemingway adjacent, I keep it next to my copy of Hemingway's A Movable Feast, a memoir by Hemingway that I've read a couple of times about his years spent in Paris. And I will note that, Morley Callaghan over there is someone who knew Hemingway and spent some time with Hemingway. Next to A Movable Feast, we have The Sun Also Rises in this wonderful hardback edition with supplementary material. Although I'm not a huge Hemingway fan, I do quite like this novel, and I think The Sun Also Rises might be my favorite work by Hemingway, with the exclusion of A Movable Feast. Yeah, I enjoy memoir quite a lot, and so out of everything I've read from Hemingway, A Movable Feast is the one I return to most, but in terms of novels, I do like The Sun Also Rises very much. And next to that, A Farewell to Arms. Not one of my absolute favorites, but it does sort of sit nicely with the other Hemingway Library edition next to it. And I think I've only read this one once. I thought it was all right. Certainly not as good as The Sun Also Rises. Next to that, I have George Orwell's Down and Out in Paris and London. This is Orwell's memoir of time spent in Paris and London. There's one particular scene about working in essentially the dish pit of a very hot, humid, and dirty kitchen, or at least so it seemed to me when I read it. That resonated with me as a teenager when I read it for the first time, because I was working my very first job doing dishes in a kitchen. And next to Orwell's memoir are 2 volumes. I would like to get volume 3 and 4 at some point, but I haven't yet, and they've disappeared, or at least last time I checked they had disappeared from Amazon. I was no longer able to order them new, so eventually when I do decide to add volume 3 and 4, I'll probably have to shop secondhand, and there is the option of getting the original publication hardcover edition. These are just, paperback reprints, but these are collections of George Orwell's writings, minor essays and letters and articles and that kind of thing. So volume 1 contains his writings from 1920 to 1940. And as you can see, my sticky note bookmark is about 2/3 of the way through almost. And volume 2 contains his writings from 1940 to 1943. I've not touched that one yet. See if I can get this back in there without too much difficulty. Next to Orwell, I have Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. A nice little short work that is definitely a classic at this point, about Woolf's need to have a physical space of her own, to write as a woman, and just about sort of carving out a space as a female author. Next to that is a collection of short stories of W. Somerset Maugham. And I had sort of whittled down my collection because I used to have a 3-volume orange box set of Penguin paperbacks, and there was a lot of duplication between that set and this volume here. It's actually volume 1 of 2. I don't have volume 2, but I decided to get rid of the ratty old paperbacks that were falling apart. Keep this hardback because it does have most of my favorite W. Somerset Maugham stories in it, with the intention that someday when I come across volume 2 at a reasonable price, I'll pick that up and add it to my shelf. So next to that is W. Somerset Maugham's The Summing Up, which is a biographical work about his writing life. And I read this one on a train at some point. We'll just see what it says on the back here. Autobiographical without being an autobiography, confessional without disclosing the private life. The Summing Up is one of the most highly regarded expressions of a personal credo. It is not a classic avowal of a professional author's ideas about style, literature, art, drama, and philosophy. It is not only, but also an illuminating insight into this great writer's craft. I read this one on a train between Toronto and Ottawa in the fall and liked it very much. Certainly if you're interested in the craft of writing or just interested in mom's craft of writing, that's one for you to read. Next to that is a writer's notebook in this lovely hardback with the dust jacket. And once again, it's about W. Somerset Maugham's writing craft. And let's see if I can get it open. I think I'm going to have to put it down on the floor here to show you it properly. But this is from the 1950s, 1951. And it really is exactly what it says. One of his notebooks published, and it's sort of like a journal, but not quite, because it is specifically related to the things he's reading, the things he's writing, and sort of samples little bits and pieces and scenes that he wrote. And I've not read all the way through it. I've dipped into it a little bit, but I don't think it's really something that you would want to, sit down and read in a single sitting or chronologically without also reading other things at once. Next to that is Virginia Woolf's A Writer's Diary. And I think this got a little muddled when I moved the books, because A Room of One's Own should more correctly be here. I'll put it on the other side of A Writer's Diary. But this is one of Woolf's diaries, or rather it's excerpts from her diaries. It's selected excerpts from the multi-volume set of books that are her journals. Now, those journals are fairly expensive to acquire. I've seen them in shops for over $100, and I don't like Virginia Woolf enough to pay that much just for her diaries. Next to that, we have a very water-stained, battered copy of The Years by Virginia Woolf. This one was on the dollar rack at a local bookstore, precisely because of its condition. And then I have a couple of kind of travel-related books here. This one's called From Gretna Green to Land's End by K.L. Bates. A literary journey in England. And this one, I admit, I bought it because the beautiful cover caught my eye. And I've not read that one. I have read the one next to it, titled The Old Houses of Stratford upon Avon by H.E. Forrest. And it is exactly what you would expect from the title. It is a compilation of chapters and sections about notable historical houses in Stratford upon Avon in England. And of course, the main interest there, of course, is Shakespeare. And so we'll push ourselves down one more level to this is sort of the assorted shelf where things have ended up that perhaps should be shelved elsewhere, but this was the last empty shelf, and the miscellaneous books ended up here. So what have we got here? We've got Catherine May's Enchantment, which, as you can see, I was about halfway through reading before Christmas, and I've set it aside. And so this is a fairly new book. I think it was in the self-help section at my local Indigo. Awakening Wonder in an Anxious Age. It's about sort of slowing down and sort of paying attention to things around you with the purpose of lowering that anxiety. And I would say it's kind of memoir. It's more memoir than it is self-help, but she's also offering kind of recommendations observed from her own life. Probably not something I would recommend. I was enjoying it, but as you can see, I wasn't enjoying it enough to have finished it yet. Then I've got a work that someone had recommended to me. Not finished it yet, I found the writing style a little bit poor, and I think, the general ideas came out within the first few pages, and I'm not sure I'm going to finish it at all, but it's something called The Marxification of Education by James Lindsay. Then, what's this here? The Tools of Argument, How the Best Lawyers Think, Argue, and Win. I've not read that one yet. That one's just kind of chilling on my shelf on the miscellaneous section of things I might read, things I might not. Then we have The Paper Trail by Alexander Moreau, which is, more rightly, it belongs further up with the books about books, but there's no space up there. So here it is, chilling down here. And it is a history of paper, physical paper, as if there's any other kind of paper. And then I have a rather battered leather-bound copy of the works of Charles Lamb. I picked this up in the summer, and I read a good hunk of it on a train back to Ottawa. It's full of all sorts of wonderful things. It's published in 2 columns, which does make it a little bit difficult to read because the font is small. But I was enjoying the many letters that are in the first part of the book. Letters to Coleridge, letters to Wordsworth, letters to Southey. And there's so much good stuff in here. I just have to be in the mood to go back and read more of it. So that's back on the shelf. And then next to it is Book Madness by Denise Guillant. Down on the shelf here, A Story of Book Collectors in America. I greatly enjoyed that one last year. It more correctly belongs farther up with the books about books, but as I said, no more space up there, so unless I rearrange the whole shelves, this is where it's going to be for now. Little notebook. Next to it is a collection of French poetry. It's the Yale Anthology of 20th Century French Poetry translated into English. Next to that is something called Perfect Red by Jane Lind, the life of Paraskevi Clark, who is a Canadian artist, and I quite like the portrait painting on the cover. She did a number of very, very striking portraits, and I saw them at the National Gallery here in Ottawa last year. I had long loved this particular painting. The first time I saw it in the Canadian exhibit, I turned a corner and there she was, kind of staring you down with that confidence. And so when there was an exhibit of Canadian Impressionists last year, I went to the gift shop and I got this book about her life. Next to that is the Anthology of Modern French Poetry, Boehm's French Manual, and stuffed in the corner here are a couple of French grammars and Aristotle's Art of Rhetoric, which I read in undergrad, and I think I dipped into it a little bit last year, just out of curiosity, and these are really the only other interesting thing on this shelf here. The Book Hunter by Burton, which is a book about books. It more correctly belongs further down the wall with the old books on books. It is a memoir of sorts about the book trade, memoir and essays. There's the Duke of Roxburgh there on the frontispiece. And I had gotten quite into the first chapter here on mighty book hunters. And then, as I recall, unfortunately my grandfather passed and I went out of the country, and this one ended up shelved and forgotten. So I'll have to remember to pull that out and finish reading that because I was very much enjoying it. Next to it is a collection of British essays in this little leather-bound, quarter leather-bound copy. Very nice book plate here. Richard Burris Carter once owned this book. And the pages are loose. But it contains The Rambler, a volume of The Rambler. And I've read a little bit of that once again. That came into my collection about the same time as Burton's The Book Hunter, and I do need to remember to pull that up and read it. I'm just realizing a lot of things got shoved in this tiny corner down here and became out of sight, out of mind. Next to that is another collection of essays. This one's by Edward Sanford Martin. And this is Lucid Intervals. As you can see, another bookmark halfway through. Out of sight, out of mind, forgotten. And I do like the illustrations in this. It's more of a lighter one, you know, essays on children, essays on breakfast, essays on exceptional talent, little humorous anecdotes about people. There's one in here called Aunt Jane. But we're at about 21 minutes, so I think we'll call it for now. Next time we'll move over to the de Beauvoir, the Pepys, and some of the other interesting books farther down this wall.